They say blood is thicker than water, a bond that can never truly be broken. But they don't tell you that sometimes that very bond becomes the sharpest weapon, the one that presses against your throat when you least expect it. Trust, you see, is like a skyscraper. It takes a lifetime of careful design and relentless work to build, but only a single, well-placed tremor from within to bring it all crashing down into a cloud of dust and memory. Liam once believed his foundation was built on solid rock, a testament to love, loyalty, and family. He was a fool. He learned that the most devastating earthquakes don't come from the shifting ground beneath your feet, but from the smiling traders who share your dinner table. The air in the Chicago hotel suite was crisp, tasting of success. Liam stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights of the Magnificent Mile sprawling below him like a carpet of fallen stars. At 35, he had just closed the biggest architectural deal of his career, a victory that was entirely his own, far from the long, oppressive shadow of his father's real estate empire. He felt a surge of pride, a deep satisfaction that he wanted to share with the one person who mattered most, his wife, Isabella. He missed her with an ache that was both sweet and sharp. Pulling out his phone, he smiled, deciding to do something he rarely did. He opened the application for the new security system he'd had installed just last week, wanting nothing more than to see a glimpse of their home, to feel a little closer to her, even from 1,000 miles away. The connection was instant, the high-definition image of his own living room filling the small screen. Everything was just as he had left it, the soft glow of the designer lamps casting warm shadows on the walls. And there she was, Isabella. Her beautiful silhouette was unmistakable as she stood near the fireplace, but she was not alone. A wave of confusion, then a cold, creeping dread, washed over Liam. She was wrapped in the arms of a man, their bodies close, their movements intimate and familiar in a way that made his stomach clench. His first thought was a desperate, illogical denial. But then Isabella laughed, a sound he knew as well as his own heartbeat, and she tilted her head back. The man holding her leaned down to kiss her, and in that moment he turned his face slightly towards the hidden camera. The world did not just stop for Liam. It fractured, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The man was not a stranger, not some random intruder into his life. The face on the screen, illuminated by the firelight in his own home, belonged to his father, Richard. In that single, silent, soul-destroying moment, the Liam who had loved, the Liam who had trusted, the Liam who had believed in the sanctity of his own home, died. And from his ashes, something cold, patient, and terrifyingly calm began to rise. To understand the depth of a betrayal, you must first understand the beauty of the trust it shattered. Before that night in a Chicago hotel room, Liam Sterling's life was a masterpiece of his own design. From the outside, his family, the Sterlings, were the embodiment of the American dream, a portrait of wealth, power, and impeccable breeding, the kind you see in glossy magazines and on the donor walls of museums. They were a dynasty built on the concrete and steel of New York City, ruled by his father, the formidable Richard Sterling. But Liam had always sought to be a different kind of architect. He didn't want to inherit a legacy. He wanted to build one, beam by beam, with his own two hands. He was the quieter Sterling, the one who found beauty not in hostile takeovers, but in the elegant curve of a cantilevered roof or the way sunlight fell through a perfectly placed window. His firm, though modest compared to his father's colossal enterprise, was his own. It was respected, innovative, and, most importantly, honest. It was a reflection of the man he strived to be, strong, self-reliant, and true. The cornerstone of this carefully constructed life was his love for Isabella. He had met her 7 years ago when she was a gallery assistant with a spirit that seemed to shine brighter than any of the art on the walls. She came from a world without trust funds or summer homes in the Hamptons, a world that felt real and untainted to Liam. He saw in her not just breathtaking beauty, but a kindred soul, someone who saw him for the man he was, not the heir he was supposed to be. Their marriage was his sanctuary, their home a fortress against the cold, transactional world his parents inhabited. He adored the way she managed to be both gentle and resilient, the way her laughter could fill the silence that had pervaded his childhood home. He believed their love was the one authentic structure in his life, a foundation that could withstand any storm. He poured his heart into their relationship with the same meticulous care he poured into his blueprints, never once imagining that the rot was not outside the walls, but spreading silently from within. Isabella, for her part, had blossomed in the sterling world. She had mastered its unspoken language with a grace that left many of the old money matriarchs both impressed and resentful. She traded her simple dresses for couture gowns, her modest apartment for a sprawling penthouse, and she did it all with a seemingly effortless charm. She was the perfect hostess, the devoted wife, the supportive daughter-in-law. She remembered the names of Richard's business partners, flattered Eleanor's society friends, and always stood by Liam's side at public events, looking up at him with an expression of pure adoration. Liam saw this as her beautiful adaptation, her love for him making her a natural fit in his world. He never saw it for what it truly was, a masterful performance, a role she had been auditioning for her entire life. He failed to notice the subtle hunger in her eyes when she looked at his father's staggering wealth, or the way she would recount details of Richard's ruthless business deals with a little too much admiration. He was an architect, a man who understood stress points and load-bearing walls, yet he remained completely blind to the fact that his wife was the weakest point in his entire structure, drawn not to his integrity, but to the overwhelming gravity of his father's power. That power was personified by Richard Sterling himself. Richard was not simply a businessman. He was a force of nature, a titan who had bent the city's skyline to his will. His office on the top floor of Sterling Tower was less a workspace and more a throne room from which he looked down upon the world he owned. He loved his son, in his own way, but it was a possessive, competitive love. He viewed Liam's independent success with a patronizing air, calling his award-winning designs a nice little hobby. For Richard, strength was measured in dollars and dominance. Compassion was a liability, and sentiment was for the weak. He moved through life with the supreme confidence of a man who had never been told no, a man who believed everything and everyone had a price. When he looked at Isabella, he didn't see a daughter. He saw a beautiful, ambitious woman, and in his profoundly narcissistic worldview, he likely believed that such a prize was better suited for the king of the castle, not the prince who wanted to build his own cottage elsewhere. He was a predator who had grown bored of hunting in the wild and had decided to hunt in his own home for the thrill of the ultimate transgression. And then there was Eleanor, the family's curator, the high priestess of appearances. Her life was a carefully orchestrated series of charity galas, board meetings, and lunches where more was said in a raised eyebrow than in an hour of conversation. Her affection was a commodity, dispensed in exchange for achievements that enhanced the Sterling name. She treated Liam's architectural career as a quaint eccentricity, something to be politely explained away to her friends. Her relationship with Isabella was a masterpiece of passive aggression. On the surface, it was all polite smiles and air kisses, but underneath, Eleanor never let Isabella forget her humble origins. Every compliment came with a subtle correction. Every piece of advice was a reminder of who held the true power in the family. Eleanor wasn't blind to her husband's nature. She was his willing accomplice. Her wedding vows were not to a man, but to an empire, and she would sacrifice anything, including her own son's happiness, to protect it from the slightest blemish of scandal. For Eleanor, an ugly truth swept under a Persian rug was infinitely preferable to a beautiful truth that might cause a scene. Family dinners were a weekly performance of this strained dynamic. Richard would hold court at the head of the table, booming about his latest conquest, his voice drowning out all others. Eleanor would gracefully steer the conversation away from any topic that might lead to genuine emotion or conflict. Isabella would be the perfect, attentive audience, refilling Richard's wine glass, laughing at his jokes, while Liam would sit there, feeling the familiar chill of his childhood, the sense of being an outsider looking in. He would reach for Isabella's hand under the table, finding solace in her touch, believing that she was his fellow exile in this gilded cage. He had no idea that her hand was simply resting in his, while her loyalty, her ambition, and her heart were already pledged to the man at the other end of the table. This was the family Liam believed in. This was the life he thought he knew. a perfect portrait hung on a wall for all to admire, while just behind the canvas, termites were silently chewing the frame to dust. The silence in a luxury hotel room is a unique thing. It's a manufactured piece, the sound of the city deliberately muffled, the air humming with the low thrum of a climate control system that promises perfect comfort. For Liam, this silence had, just moments before, been the sound of triumph. Now, it was the sound of a vacuum, the noise of a life being emptied of all its meaning. He sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, his phone held in a grip so tight his knuckles were white. The screen, a small, cold rectangle of light, was playing a scene from a nightmare, but it was a nightmare happening in his own living room, 1,000 miles away. He kept hitting replay, a desperate, masochistic ritual. Each time the short clip started over, a part of him prayed the pixels would rearrange themselves into something else, something sensical, something that didn't feel like a blade twisting in his soul. But the truth was relentless. There she was, Isabella, his Isabella, bathed in the warm light of the home they had built together. She was adjusting the collar of a man's shirt, her fingers moving with a tender familiarity. The man's hand rested on her hip, possessive and casual. They were not in the frantic, clumsy throes of a new and illicit passion. No, this was far worse. This was comfortable. This was practiced. They moved around each other with the easy choreography of a long-established couple, their shared smiles and knowing glances weaving a secret world that Liam had never known existed. He watched, frozen, as she laughed, throwing her head back, and the man leaned in. The kiss was not frantic or stolen. It was slow and deep, a kiss of ownership. And when the man pulled back, turning his head to murmur something in her ear, the camera caught his profile, and the universe simply ceased to exist. It was his father, Richard. The name echoed in the screaming silence of Liam's mind. Father, husband, the two central pillars of his identity, the two roles he defined himself by, were now inextricably linked to this single, obscene act. A wave of nausea so violent it made him double over, threatened to choke him. He stumbled into the marble bathroom and wretched into the toilet, his body convulsing as it tried to expel a poison that had infected his entire being. It wasn't just the visual of the act itself, it was the retroactive decay of his entire life. Every memory he cherished was now tainted, rewritten in the horrifying light of this new truth. The time Richard had praised Isabella's business acumen, calling her a sharp girl, a real asset to the family. Was that a father-in-law's compliment or a partner's boast? The expensive bracelet his father had given her for her birthday, a gift Liam had thought was strangely extravagant at the time. Was it a gift or a payment? Every late night she had claimed to be with friends, every business trip his father had taken that conveniently coincided with Liam being out of town, the pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and innocent, were now clicking into place, forming a picture of a conspiracy so monstrous, so profoundly intimate, he could barely comprehend it. He staggered back into the room and stared at his own reflection in the dark glass of the window. The successful architect, the proud husband, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a pale, hollowed-out ghost with eyes that looked 100 years old. The grief was there, a vast black ocean of it, but something else was rising through it. It was cold and hard and heavy. It was rage. But it wasn't the hot, explosive rage that makes a man punch a wall. It was a glacial fury, slow-moving but immensely powerful, a force that grinds mountains into dust. It was the quiet, methodical anger of a builder who has just discovered that his foundation, the very ground he built his life upon, is nothing but quicksand. He had been played for a fool, not just by his wife, but by the man whose approval he had spent his life trying to earn and escape in equal measure. They hadn't just betrayed him. They had humiliated him, turning his home into their stage and his love into their cover story. He picked up the phone again. His hands were steady now. His mind, trained to think in terms of load-bearing walls, stress points, and structural integrity, began to work. A direct confrontation was out of the question. He could already hear the script. Richard's booming, dismissive laughter. "My God, son, you're hysterical. I was comforting your wife. She was worried about you. Isabella's tears, her wounded expression. How could you even think that, Liam? Your own father? You're tearing this family apart with your paranoia. They would gaslight him into oblivion. They were masters of manipulation, and he would be cast as the unhinged, jealous husband, the ungrateful son. They would close ranks, and he would be the one left on the outside, broken and discredited. Number A building is not brought down by shouting at it. It is brought down by meticulously identifying its weakest points and applying precise, overwhelming pressure. He was an architect. He knew how to deconstruct things just as well as he knew how to build them. He navigated to the video file, his movements deliberate. He saved it. He backed it up to a secure, anonymous cloud server. He then deleted the original file and the notification from the security app on his phone. He erased every trace of his discovery. The battle could not be fought on their terms. It had to be fought on his. He would go home. He would smile. He would kiss his wife and shake his father's hand. He would play the part of the loving, unsuspecting fool. He would let them get comfortable in their lies, let them grow arrogant in their deception. And all the while, he would be in the shadows, gathering his tools, drawing his new blueprints. He was no longer designing a building. He was designing a demolition. The flight from Chicago to New York was a masterclass in dissociation. Liam sat in his first-class seat, a glass of untouched whiskey sweating onto the napkin beside him. Outside the curved window, the world was a serene canvas of brilliant blue sky and pillowy white clouds, a peaceful vista that felt like a profound insult to the maelstrom raging within him. He was an architect of the mind now, constructing a facade so flawless, so structurally sound, that no one would ever suspect the ruin it was designed to conceal. He practiced in the reflection of the dark window, watching the muscles in his face move. He engineered a smile that reached his eyes but carried no warmth. He rehearsed the story of his success, stripping it of any genuine joy until it was just a sequence of facts, a script he could recite on command. The man who had boarded the plane in a state of silent, fractured shock was slowly being encased in ice, layer by painstaking layer. By the time the wheels touched down at JFK, Liam Sterling, the husband, was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating observer wearing his face. Walking through the door of his own home was like stepping onto a stage. The air, once filled with the comforting scent of home, now felt thick and heavy with unspoken secrets. And there she was, Isabella, rushing to greet him, a vision of wifely devotion. "You're home," she breathed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I missed you terribly." Liam's body went rigid for a microsecond before he forced his muscles to relax, to return the embrace. Her perfume, a scent he once associated with love and passion, now smelled cloying, the fragrance of deceit. He could feel the frantic beat of his own heart, a drum pounding out a rhythm of pure revulsion. He had to fight the primal urge to shove her away, to see the confusion and fear in her eyes. Instead, he held her, patting her back gently, and placed a kiss on her forehead. A gesture so tender and so completely false, it made him feel sick. "I missed you too," he said, and the lie slid from his lips with terrifying ease. And then, a voice from the living room, a deep baritone that used to command his respect and now curdled his blood. "There's my boy. Welcome back, Richard." Of course, his father was there. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. He was not just conducting an affair. He was luxuriating in it, sitting in his son's living room as if he owned the place, which, in his mind, he probably believed he did. Richard rose from Liam's favorite armchair, a broad, self-satisfied smile on his face. He extended a hand, and Liam took it, the skin-on-skin contact feeling like a burn. His father's grip was firm, proprietary. "Heard you closed the Chicago deal. Knew you had it in you," Richard boomed, clapping Liam on the shoulder. It was the ultimate power play, the predator marking his territory and praising the pup in the same breath. Liam met his father's gaze, searching for any flicker of guilt, any hint of shame. He found nothing but the same cool, confident appraisal Richard gave to a building he was about to acquire. The dinner that followed was an exercise in surreal torture. The three of them sat at the polished mahogany table, the same table where Liam and Isabella had hosted countless happy gatherings. Now, it felt like an interrogation table, and Liam was the only one who knew it. Isabella had prepared his favorite meal, roast chicken with rosemary, a gesture of loving care that was now just another calculated move in their elaborate play. The conversation flowed with a grotesque normalcy. Richard dominated, as always, recounting a story about a rival he had financially crushed, while Isabella listened, rapt, occasionally adding a flattering comment. "You're brilliant, Richard." "Truly," she said, her eyes shining. Liam watched them, a scientist observing two alien specimens. He noted the way his father's eyes would linger on Isabella's mouth as she spoke, the almost imperceptible smile she would give him when she thought Liam was looking down at his plate. They were so confident, so utterly secure in his ignorance. "So, tell us everything, darling," Isabella prompted, turning her dazzling smile on him. "Don't be modest. How did you win them over?" And so, Liam performed. He recounted the meetings, the negotiations, the final handshake. He told the story with just the right amount of enthusiasm, careful not to overdo it. He felt like he was floating above his own body, watching a stranger speak with his voice. Each word he spoke was a lie, not in its content, but in its delivery. He was speaking of triumph from a place of utter defeat, of success from the heart of his life's greatest failure. He ate the food that tasted like cardboard, sipped the wine that felt like acid, and laughed at his father's jokes, a hollow sound in the tense silence of his mind. Every moment was a test of his resolve, and with every passing second, the ice around his heart grew thicker. He was no longer just an observer, he was a participant in their deception, using their own tactics against them. When dinner was over, Richard finally stood to leave. He placed a hand on Isabella's shoulder, a lingering, familiar touch. "You take care of my boy, you hear?" he said to her, a cruel, private joke passing between them, right in front of Liam. Then he turned to Liam, pulling him into a brief, masculine hug. "Good to have you home, son," he whispered, his voice laced with a paternal warmth that was pure poison. As the front door closed, leaving Liam and Isabella alone, a new kind of tension filled the apartment. The performance for the public was over. Now the private one began. "I'm so glad he was here to celebrate with us," Isabella said, beginning to clear the plates. "He's so proud of you." "He's proud of how easily we can fool you," Liam thought. Later, in the bedroom, the space that had once been their most intimate sanctuary, she came to him, her silk nightgown whispering against her skin. She wrapped her arms around him from behind as he stood looking out at the city lights. "I've waited all day for this," she murmured, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. Her touch was electric, a jolt of pure revulsion that shot through his entire nervous system. He didn't flinch. He had prepared for this. He turned slowly, placed his hands gently on her arms, and stepped back. "I'm sorry, Izzy," he said, his voice a perfect imitation of weary disappointment. "The trip just took everything out of me. I'm exhausted." He saw a flicker of annoyance in her eyes before it was replaced by a mask of perfect understanding. "Of course, my love. You rest," she said, her voice dripping with sympathy. Lying in the dark, inches away from her, listening to the soft, even rhythm of her breathing, Liam had never felt more alone. The mask was in place. The long, silent war had begun. The first morning back was the hardest. Waking up to the soft light filtering through the bedroom blinds, with Isabella's arm draped over his chest, her head resting on his shoulder, was a form of exquisite agony. For a fleeting, merciful second upon waking, his mind was blank, and he felt the familiar comfort of her presence. Then, the memory of the video feed crashed back into him, a mental tsunami of images and sounds, and her touch became a brand, her scent, the suffocating smell of betrayal. He lay perfectly still, a statue of a husband, his mind a whirlwind of cold, clear thought. Grief was a luxury he could no longer afford. Pain was a vulnerability he had to conquer. The man who had been shattered in Chicago was gone. The man who woke up in this bed was a strategist, and his first order of business was to build a fortress from which he could wage his silent war. Within a week, he found the perfect place. It was a small, charmless apartment on the fourth floor of a pre-war walk-up in a neighborhood he had no reason to ever visit. The windows looked out onto a brick wall, the floors creaked, and the air was perpetually stale. It was perfect. He paid for 6 months in cash, using a name he'd invented. This anonymous, sterile space became his sanctuary, his true home. While his penthouse apartment was a stage, meticulously maintained for his performance, this small room was his reality. He bought a cheap desk, a comfortable chair, a powerful laptop, a burner phone, and a large corkboard that soon covered most of one wall. This was his command center, the only place on earth where he could drop the mask of the loving husband and become what he truly was, the architect of a meticulous and deserved ruin. He knew he couldn't gather the necessary materials alone. His first call from the burner phone was to a discreet law firm he had worked with on a zoning issue years ago. He didn't ask for a lawyer, he asked for a referral. He needed someone who operated in the gray areas, someone who could unearth secrets without leaving a trace. The name he was given was Arthur Vance. Vance was a former NYPD detective who had retired early and now worked as a private investigator for the city's elite. They met in a dimly lit corner of a midtown coffee shop that smelled of burnt espresso. Vance was a man who looked like he had been carved from granite and cynicism, his eyes missing nothing. Liam didn't present himself as a cuckolded husband seeking sordid proof. He laid out the situation with the calm precision of an engineer discussing a structural problem. "I require comprehensive surveillance on 2 individuals," Liam stated, sliding a folder across the table. "My wife, Isabella Sterling, and my father, Richard Sterling. I need a complete record of their movements, their meetings, their communications. I need evidence that is unimpeachable. Your discretion is not a request, it is the primary condition of your employment." Vance listened without a word, his gaze fixed on Liam. He had seen betrayed spouses before they were usually a mess of tears and rage. This cold, controlled young man was different. This wasn't about heartbreak, this was about strategy. "It'll be expensive," Vance said, his voice a low gravel. "Expense is not the issue," Liam replied. "Results are." His second call was to find a different kind of detective, a hunter of numbers. He suspected this betrayal ran deeper than the bedroom, that it coiled around the roots of his father's company. He needed a forensic accountant, a digital surgeon who could dissect a corporate empire and find the cancer. He found her through a similar referral, Elena Petrova. Her office was the polar opposite of his meeting with Vance. It was a bright, minimalist space in a modern glass tower, smelling of clean air and quiet efficiency. Petrova was sharp, with eyes that seemed to see the world in spreadsheets and data points. Again, Liam was all business. "I have reason to believe there are financial irregularities within Sterling Enterprises," he explained, specifically concerning the funneling of funds into off-book accounts. "My access is limited, but I am still a shareholder. I need you to find where the money is going." He gave her the names of a few recent projects his father had boasted about, projects that seemed to have unusually high overhead costs. Like Vance, she was impressed by his composure. He wasn't a son lashing out at a father. He was a client presenting a puzzle. "If there is a trail," she said, her fingers already tapping away at a keyboard, "I will find it." With his 2 operatives in the field, Liam's life split into 3 distinct, exhausting realities. There was the public, Liam, the successful architect and devoted husband. He took Isabella to galas, to the theater, to dinners with friends. He complimented her dress, held her hand, and listened with feigned interest as she talked about her day, all the while analyzing her every word, every glance, for clues. He had to fight the constant urge to call out her lies, to see her perfect facade crumble. Each fake smile, each feigned kiss was a small piece of his soul being ground into dust, but he endured it, knowing it was necessary to keep his enemies comfortable and unaware. Then there was the professional Liam, who had to continue running his firm, designing buildings, and managing his staff, all while his mind was on a completely different kind of construction project. He began delegating more, trusting his senior partners to handle the day-to-day, creating pockets of time he could steal for his true work. And then, late at night, there was the real Liam. After Isabella was asleep, He would slip out of his apartment and drive to his war room. There, under the harsh glow of a single desk lamp, the mask would come off. He would pin Vance's daily reports to the corkboard, a lunch meeting between Isabella and Richard at a discreet restaurant, a trip she took to a jewelry store, followed by a wire transfer from a holding company he didn't recognize. He would trace their movements on a map of the city, the red lines of their paths intertwining, mocking him. He would spend hours on the phone with Petrova, who was beginning to uncover a complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts, all linked to his father's company in ways that were deliberately obscure. The pain was still there, a constant, dull ache in his chest, but in this room, it transformed. It became focus, it became purpose, it became fuel. 1 week after his return, the first concrete piece of evidence arrived. It was a simple manila envelope delivered by a courier to his office. Inside were a dozen high-resolution photographs. The first one showed his father and his wife entering the Carlisle Hotel in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. The subsequent photos showed them in the hotel bar, laughing, his father's hand resting possessively on her thigh. They looked relaxed, entitled, and utterly in love. Seeing the betrayal in such stark, professional detail was different from the grainy security footage. This was cold, hard fact, stripped of all emotion. It did not make him want to weep. It made his blood run cold. Later that night, an encrypted email arrived from Petrova. Subject: anomaly found. She had traced a $100,000 payment from a subcontractor on one of Richard's construction sites to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, a company whose sole director was listed as Isabella Rossi, her maiden name. Liam printed the email and the wire transfer confirmation. He walked over to the corkboard and pinned the photo of them at the hotel directly in the center. Beside it, he pinned the financial records, the personal betrayal and the financial conspiracy, side by side. This wasn't just an affair, it was a business arrangement, a hostile takeover of his entire life. The first steps into the shadows were complete, and Liam realized he was not afraid of the dark. He was beginning to master it. The first pieces of evidence were like poison darts, small and sharp, delivering a potent but localized pain. The photographs from Arthur Vance confirmed the physical betrayal, while Elena Petrova's initial report hinted at a financial one. But Liam, standing in the stark quiet of his secret apartment, knew this was only the beginning. He could feel it in his bones, the same way he could feel a flaw in a building's design. The structure of their deceit was far larger, far more complex than a simple affair. He was looking at the cracks in the facade, but he had yet to comprehend the rot in the foundation. The $100,000 payment to Isabella was not a gift from a lover, it was an invoice. And Liam was about to discover the horrifying nature of the services she was providing. The call that changed everything came at 2 a.m. Liam was in his war room, staring at the corkboard, trying to find a pattern. His burner phone vibrated, and Elena Petrova's name flashed on the screen. Her voice was calm, but it was the unnerving calm of a scientist who has just made a terrifying breakthrough. "Mr. Sterling," she began, "I apologize for the hour, but I believe you will want to see this immediately. The account in your wife's maiden name. It is not a destination, it is a waypoint." She explained that the initial payment she found was just a test run. In the months that followed, she had uncovered a dozen more, each larger than the last. The money flowed from Sterling Enterprises, through various subcontractors and shell corporations, into Isabella's Cayman account, and then, almost immediately, it was redirected to a new set of numbered accounts in Switzerland and Singapore. "Think of it as a sophisticated laundering operation," Petrova explained, her voice devoid of emotion. "Your father inflates the costs of his construction projects, awarding massive contracts to companies that exist only on paper. These phantom companies bill Sterling Enterprises for services never rendered. The payment is then funneled through the Cayman account your wife controls, which gives it a veneer of separation before being deposited into accounts so anonymous they are virtually untraceable." Liam listened, the phone pressed hard against his ear. The hum of his cheap refrigerator was the only other sound in the room. He wasn't just being cheated on, he was being systematically robbed. His inheritance, the value of the company his grandfather had built, was being siphoned off, gallon by gallon, into a secret financial reservoir for their future. A chilling clarity washed over him. He looked at the photograph of Isabella and Richard laughing in the hotel bar. Her smile was no longer the smile of a woman in love. It was the smile of a predator who had successfully cornered her prey. She wasn't his father's mistress. She was his business partner. She was the offshore account manager, the clean face on a dirty operation, the firewall between Richard's reputation and his colossal greed. The affair wasn't the motive, it was the mechanism. It was the glue that bound their conspiracy, the cover story that would explain her sudden wealth if anyone ever looked too closely. They would simply say Richard was being generous to his son's wife. Liam felt a surge of something colder and harder than rage. It was a profound, almost intellectual disgust. They had not just broken his heart. They had assessed his worth, his love, his entire life, and decided its only value was as a screen for their crimes. This realization ignited a new, obsessive fire within him. He was no longer content to let his operatives work alone. He had Petrova send him every document, every transfer slip, every corporate filing. He spent his nights transforming from an architect of buildings into an architect of evidence. Surrounded by stacks of paper, his wall now covered in complex flowcharts, drawn with a black marker, he taught himself the language of their greed. He learned about wire fraud, shell corporations, and the arcane laws of offshore banking. He traced the lines of stolen money as they crisscrossed the globe, each new discovery a fresh layer of filth on the two people he had once revered and adored. His double life became more intense. By day, he would sit across from Isabella at breakfast, listening to her talk about a charity luncheon, all the while knowing she had spent the previous afternoon finalizing a 7-figure wire transfer to Singapore. The sheer scale of her duplicity was astounding. The smoking gun came from a project his father had called his masterpiece, the new Sterling Tower, a gleaming skyscraper that had redefined a slice of the city's skyline. Petrova, digging deep into the building's budget, found a payment that made no sense. A $23 million contract had been awarded for the building's entire heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. The recipient was a company called Apex Climate Solutions. On paper, it looked legitimate. But Petrova's instincts told her otherwise. She discovered that Apex Climate Solutions had been incorporated just 3 weeks before the contract was awarded. Its registered address was a post office box in the British Virgin Islands. It had no employees, no website, no physical presence whatsoever. It was a ghost. And the $23 million, once paid, had vanished into the same labyrinth of offshore accounts controlled by Isabella. Liam stared at the documents on his screen, his blood running cold. This wasn't just skimming profits. This was audacious, company-gutting fraud. His father had jeopardized the structural integrity and reputation of his own crowning achievement, all to enrich himself and his mistress. He finally understood his father completely. Richard Sterling didn't build things to create a legacy. He built them to create opportunities for theft. The buildings, the company, even his own family, were nothing more than assets to be leveraged and stripped for parts. And Isabella? Liam forced himself to sift through his memories, re-examining them under this harsh new light. Her innocent questions early in their marriage about his trust fund, her subtle disappointment when he chose to start his own firm instead of taking a senior role at Sterling Enterprises, her constant admiration for his father's killer instinct. It had all been research. He wasn't a husband to her. He was a point of entry, a key to a vault she had every intention of emptying. The sweet-spirited girl from the art gallery had never existed. That was just a character, a role played by a ruthlessly ambitious woman who had targeted his family from the moment she met him. He stood back and looked at his corkboard. It was no longer a simple diagram of an affair. It was the sprawling, intricate map of a criminal enterprise. The photograph of his wife and father was now just a small pin in the center of a vast web of deceit. The personal pain, while still present, had been dwarfed and consumed by the sheer, breathtaking magnitude of their greed. His mission was no longer about a broken heart. It was about justice. Not the emotional, messy justice of a confrontation, but the cold, hard, mathematical justice of a reckoning. The price of their betrayal wasn't just his happiness. It was a measurable, multi-million-dollar sum. And he would dedicate every waking moment to making sure they paid their debt in full, in a court of law and in the court of public opinion, until their entire corrupt world was nothing but a pile of ash. The corkboard in Liam's war room had become a testament to meticulous hatred. What started as a single photograph had metastasized into a sprawling cancer of bank statements, surveillance logs, and corporate filings, all connected by a web of red string. He had enough. The evidence compiled by Vance and Petrova was a legal sledgehammer, more than sufficient to send his father and his wife to prison for a very long time. He could, at any moment, hand the entire file over to the authorities and watch the system grind them into dust. But as he stood in the stale air of his secret apartment, he realized that quiet, clinical justice was not enough. Prison was a consequence, but it was not a reckoning. They had not just committed crimes against his bank account, they had committed them against his soul, in the dark, while smiling to his face. Their punishment, he decided, had to be as public and as humiliating as their betrayal had been private and intimate. He needed to destroy the one thing they held even dearer than their stolen money, their reputation, their immaculate public image. To do that, he couldn't just expose them. He had to make them expose themselves. He had to build them a beautiful, gilded stage and hand them the microphone, so the whole world could hear their confession. He had to stop being the hunter. He had to become the bait. The first phase of the plan was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, a performance that required him to dredge up the very emotions he had worked so hard to encase in ice. He began to play the part of the repentant husband. He started coming home from work early, bearing gifts, a first edition book for Isabella, a bouquet of her favorite peonies. He would apologize for being so distant, for burying himself in his work. "I feel like I've been taking you for granted," he said one evening, his voice a perfect blend of sincerity and shame. "I've been so focused on proving myself, on competing with my father, that I forgot what truly matters. I forgot about us." He watched her reaction, a flicker of surprise followed by a wave of smug satisfaction. It was exactly as he'd predicted. She didn't see a trap, she saw a victory. In her mind, her affair with the more powerful Sterling had made the younger one wake up and realize her value. He was not a man uncovering a conspiracy. He was a fool, terrified of losing her, now blaming himself for her betrayal. She became even more affectionate, more confident, utterly convinced of her own irresistible power. Simultaneously, he began to mend the carefully cultivated distance with his father. He scheduled a lunch with Richard, choosing his father's favorite steakhouse, a place that was a temple to masculine power and old money. He didn't speak of family or feelings. He spoke the only language his father truly respected: business. He laid out a blueprint for a new museum wing he was designing, and then, with feigned humility, he pointed to a structural challenge. "I'm not sure how to approach it," Liam confessed, sliding the blueprint across the table. "I know this is small potatoes for you, but I was hoping you might have some advice." Richard leaned back, a pleased, predatory gleam in his eyes. For years he had seen his son's independence as an affront. Now, here was Liam, the prodigal son, finally admitting his own limitations, finally acknowledging his father's superior wisdom. Richard dispensed his advice with a magnanimous air, feeling the full, intoxicating thrill of his dominance. His son was coming to him for help, completely unaware that he was being methodically dismantled by the very man he was seeking counsel from. The arrogance of it was a drug, and Richard was happily addicted. After weeks of this careful stage setting, Liam knew the moment was right. He booked a table at the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a place where proposals were made and fortunes were sealed. He presented it to Isabella and Richard as a celebration, a night to mark a new beginning for their family. The mood was perfect, the wine was flowing, and their guards were completely down. After the main course, Liam cleared his throat. He started by speaking to his father. "Dad," he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. I was wrong to try and build my own little kingdom. My place is with you, with the family. I want in." He then unveiled his proposal. He explained his intention to sell a majority stake in his architectural firm and liquidate a large portion of his personal investment portfolio. He wanted to invest it all, a sum in the high 8 figures, directly into Richard's new flagship project, the Celestine Tower. The very project Liam knew was a desperate gambit to cover his massive fraud. "I want to be your partner, Dad, not just your son," Liam finished. He watched as his father's face struggled to contain a torrent of emotions: shock, triumph, and above all, pure, unadulterated greed. It was the perfect solution falling from the sky, a massive injection of clean capital from a source no one would ever question. Before Richard could even respond, Liam turned to Isabella, his eyes softening, his face a perfect mask of adoration. "And Izzy," he said, taking her hand, "this new chapter isn't just about business. It's about us. I feel like we've been drifting, and that's my fault. I want to fix it. I want to stand up in front of all our friends, our family, the whole world, and tell them that you are the only thing that matters to me." He let a tear well in his eye. "I want us to renew our vows." He let that sink in, then delivered the final, crucial piece of the trap. "And I think we should do it at the Sterling Foundation Gala. We can make a joint announcement, the new Sterling and Son partnership, and the renewal of our love. A celebration of this family's future." The silence that followed was thick with their stunned, ecstatic disbelief. It was everything they could have ever wanted, gift-wrapped and delivered by their designated victim. For Richard, it was financial salvation and the ultimate validation of his power. For Isabella, it was the final scene of her masterpiece, a public coronation that would solidify her position and her access to a now even larger fortune. They accepted with feigned humility and real, palpable glee. Tears of joy, this time, streamed down Isabella's face as she threw her arms around Liam. Richard clapped him on the back, his voice thick with emotion, calling it the proudest moment of his life. They immediately began to discuss the gala, their minds racing with plans, with dollar signs, with the glorious spectacle of their impending triumph. Later that night, as he lay in the dark, Liam felt none of the elation of a successful gambit. He felt only a profound, chilling emptiness. He had to listen to his wife, sleeping beside him, murmuring in her sleep about dress designers for the vow renewal. He had handed them the most beautiful, intricate shovel ever made. And now, he just had to watch as they dug their own graves with joyous, feverish determination. The stage was set. The audience was invited. The sweet bait had been taken. While the high society of New York buzzed with anticipation for the Sterling Foundation's annual gala, an event now supercharged with the drama of a surprise vow renewal, Liam Sterling moved through a different world entirely. It was a world of shadows and encrypted emails, of late-night drives to anonymous apartments, of a cold, singular purpose that had eclipsed every other emotion. As Isabella lost herself in a whirlwind of florists, caterers, and fittings for a custom couture gown, giggling on the phone with her friends about her husband's romantic reawakening, Liam was quietly assembling the tools for her annihilation. As Richard preened in his office, accepting the congratulations of his board members for his brilliant new partnership with his son, basking in the glow of his own perceived genius, Liam was methodically weaving the net that would soon be pulled tight around them both. The time for passive observation was over. With the trap now set, Liam needed to ensure the evidence was not just damning, but theatrically, undeniably devastating. He met with Arthur Vance in a parked car on a rain-slicked street. "The photographs and financial trails are the foundation," Liam said, his voice low and steady. "But I need something more. I need their own words. I need the world to hear their contempt, their arrogance, from their own mouths." Vance, a man rarely surprised by the depths of human depravity, simply nodded. Planting a listening device on a man like Richard Sterling was a high-risk move, but the potential payoff was immense. The following night, using a sophisticated digital key cloner he had acquired, Vance spent 3 silent, tense minutes in the private parking garage beneath Richard's office building. When he emerged, a tiny, high-fidelity transmitter, no bigger than a thumbnail, was securely and invisibly affixed deep within the dashboard of Richard's prized Bentley. The first few days of listening were an exercise in excruciating patience. Liam would spend hours in his war room, a headset on, listening to the mundane soundtrack of his father's life. Arrogant business calls, obsequious conversations with politicians, instructions barked at his driver. Liam listened through it all, waiting. And then, it came. Richard was driving home from a board meeting, and he made a call. Isabella's voice, clear and intimate, filled Liam's ears. "How did it go?" she asked. "Like a dream," Richard purred. "The board is ecstatic about the new capital. They're calling him a hero for saving the Celestine project." A soft, cruel laugh came from Isabella. "Our little hero. Has he signed the final investment papers yet?" "Friday," Richard confirmed. "After that, his money is our money. Locked in tight. It gives us a few months of good press. We secure the financing to cover our previous withdrawals, and then we find a reason to push him out." "And the vow renewal?" Isabella asked. "My love, it's the perfect cover," Richard said, his voice dripping with condescending affection. "A beautiful, public declaration of love and family unity. No one will ever suspect a thing when, 6 months from now, we discover his gross incompetence, and the board has to reluctantly remove him. You'll be the grieving, supportive wife, and I'll be the disappointed father. It's a masterpiece." Liam sat frozen, his hands clenched into fists. He had suspected the plan, but to hear it laid bare, to hear the casual, clinical cruelty in their voices as they discussed the demolition of his life, was like having acid poured into his ears. He saved the audio file, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. While Vance delivered the poison of their words, Elena Petrova was busy refining the science of their greed. She had transformed from a forensic accountant into a storyteller of financial crime. In a series of secure video calls, she walked Liam through her final presentation. "The numbers are too complex for a layperson to grasp in a dramatic setting, Mr. Sterling," she explained. "So I've simplified it. We will present it as a story in 3 acts. On the screen, she displayed a series of sleek, devastatingly simple slides. The first was titled The Promise, Sterling Tower's official budget, showing the legitimate, board-approved $23 million contract for the HVAC system. The next slide, titled The Ghost, Apex Climate Solutions, showed the company's fake address, its date of incorporation, and its complete lack of assets or employees. The final, brutal slide was titled The Payoff, A Love Story, and it was a simple, clean flowchart. A thick red line moved from the Sterling Enterprises logo through the Ghost Company and ended on a box containing Isabella's name, her photo, and the balance of the Swiss bank account where the millions had finally come to rest. It was a presentation so clear, so visually damning, a child could understand it. It was financial fraud turned into a morality play. The final piece of the net, the one that would remove any shred of doubt about their intentions, came from an unexpected lead from Vance. His surveillance had tracked Richard to a late-night meeting not with Isabella, but with his private estate lawyer. This deviation from the pattern was a red flag. Liam passed the information to Petrova, who, using methods Liam was wise enough not to ask about, managed to gain access to the law firm's secure servers. What she found was the ultimate betrayal. It was a newly drafted codicil to Richard Sterling's last will and testament, set to be signed and executed the day after the gala. The document was a systematic erasure of Liam's existence. It detailed a clause that, upon Liam's removal from the company for malfeasance or incompetence, his entire share of the family inheritance would be forfeited. And where would that vast fortune go? A significant portion was to be redirected into a charitable trust. A trust whose sole executor and beneficiary, with full control over all its assets, was listed as Isabella Sterling. Liam read the document on his laptop screen, the clinical legal language a stark contrast to the sheer, biblical scale of the betrayal. This was their endgame. It wasn't just about stealing his investment. It was about stealing his birthright, his past, and his future, and handing the keys to his entire life over to her. This was not a plan born of passion. It was a cold, corporate-style, hostile takeover of a human being. Any lingering, residual pain in his heart, any microscopic fragment of the love he once felt for his father or his wife, was instantly vaporized. He was not a son fighting a father, or a husband punishing a wife. He was an entity facing two hostile forces that had attempted to liquidate him. The emotional connection was finally, blessedly severed. All that remained was the objective. He stood before his corkboard, which was now complete. The audio files were loaded. The financial presentation was polished. The proof of their planned coup was undeniable. The net was woven, every strand reinforced with irrefutable proof. The gala was no longer a stage for a trap. It was an abattoir, and the guests of honor were happily sharpening the knives for their own slaughter. Before an army marches, a good general surveys the field one last time, ensuring no friendly forces are in the line of fire. For Liam, with the gala just 2 weeks away, there was one final, desperate reconnaissance mission he had to undertake. It was a fool's errand, a venture driven by the last, stubborn ghost of the man he used to be. He had to know, with absolute certainty, that he was truly alone. He had to give his mother, Eleanor, one last chance to be a mother. He knew, with a cold intellectual certainty, how she would likely react, but a small, persistent voice, in the deepest part of his soul, the voice of a little boy who had once craved her approval and needed to hear it for himself. He needed to look her in the eye and see if there was a woman there, or just a guardian of the family brand. He drove to the grand Sterling estate in Westchester on a crisp autumn afternoon. The house, the one he had grown up in, seemed like a museum from a life that was not his own. It was a magnificent prison of manicured lawns and inherited wealth, every window reflecting the sky with a cold, impersonal glare. He found his mother in the sunroom, a space of jarringly perfect white wicker furniture and artfully arranged orchids. The room was flooded with light, yet it felt as frigid and sterile as a laboratory. Eleanor was reading, a cashmere throw draped over her lap, the picture of aristocratic leisure. She greeted him with a polite, bloodless kiss on the cheek, her eyes assessing his suit, his posture, before offering him tea. They engaged in the familiar, hollow ritual of their conversations, discussing the weather, the stock market, the seating chart for the upcoming gala. The triviality of it was suffocating. After a few minutes of this verbal dance, Liam gently placed a simple, sealed manila envelope on the glass table between them. "Mother," he began, his voice even and calm, "I didn't come here to discuss the gala. I've come because I'm in trouble, and I need your guidance." Eleanor's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. Trouble was a vulgar word in her vocabulary, something that happened to other families. "What sort of trouble, Liam?" she asked, her tone suggesting he had overdrawn an allowance. "A family matter," he said, pushing the envelope towards her. "A tragedy. I think it's best if you just look." Her movements were precise and deliberate as she picked up the envelope, her manicured nails tapping against the paper. She slid out the single photograph inside. It was one of Vance's clearest shots. Richard and Isabella, seated at the bar of the Carlisle, his hand high on her thigh, their faces close, sharing a laugh that was intimate and exclusive. Liam watched his mother's face with the intensity of a seismologist watching a needle. For a single, unguarded second, he saw it. A flicker of genuine pain, a sharp intake of breath, the brief, terrible crumbling of her iron composure. Her face paled, and her lips thinned into a bloodless line. It was the reaction of a wife, a woman betrayed. But then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. The mask of the Sterling matriarch slammed back into place, harder and more impenetrable than before. She did not gasp. She did not cry. She did not look at her son with sympathy. She carefully placed the photograph face down on the table, aligning it perfectly with the edge, as if tidying up a minor mess. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea, her hand perfectly steady. When she finally spoke, her voice was colder than the autumn air outside. "And what, precisely, do you intend to do with this piece of melodrama?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Liam was momentarily stunned into silence by the sheer force of her denial. "What do I intend to do?" he repeated, his own voice barely a whisper. "He's my father, she's my wife, in our home." "Richard," his mother began, her voice taking on the condescending tone of a lecture, is a man of immense pressures and appetites. He has built an empire that you, for all your creative talents, could never comprehend. Great men have needs. It is the responsibility of those around them to understand this, to accommodate it, and above all, to be discreet. She looked at him then, her eyes like chips of ice. And Isabella is your wife, a beautiful, but perhaps ambitious girl from a simple background, a girl who is clearly not being managed properly. Perhaps if you had spent less time on your little architectural projects and more time being a husband, this unfortunate situation would not have arisen. Liam felt as though all the air had been sucked out of the room. She was not defending her husband out of love or loyalty. She was defending a corporate asset. She was not consoling her son. She was reprimanding a subordinate for failing to control a situation that could lead to a public relations crisis. "So, I am to blame?" he asked, the question flat, devoid of emotion. "We are all to blame if this gets out," she corrected him sharply. "I have spent 40 years of my life building the Sterling name, protecting it from scandal, from weakness, from the emotional incontinence of people like you. I have stood by your father through far worse than this little dalliance. It's called duty. It's called sacrifice. You swallow your pride, you handle your domestic problems in private, and you present a united front to the world. You will say nothing. You will do nothing. You will go to that gala, you will smile for the cameras, and you will renew your vows with that girl, and this will all be forgotten. The family's reputation is not a toy for you to break, simply because your feelings are hurt." He just stared at her. In that moment, he didn't see a mother. He saw a stranger. He saw the CEO of a corrupt and soulless corporation, a woman who had long ago traded her heart for a controlling interest in an empire of lies. Her complicity wasn't passive. It was the very bedrock upon which his father's tyranny was built. She was the enabler-in-chief, the keeper of secrets, the one who polished the silverware while the bodies were being buried in the garden. This was the final, most profound betrayal. His father had betrayed his trust. His wife had betrayed his love. But his mother, with her cold, pragmatic cruelty, had betrayed the very idea of family itself. A great, surprising sense of peace washed over Liam. The last chain holding him to his past had just been shattered. There was nothing left to save, nothing left to protect. He was not destroying a family, he was euthanizing a diseased and toxic institution. He slowly stood up. "Thank you for the tea, Mother," he said, his voice polite and distant, "and for your clarity." He turned and walked out of the sunroom, out of the grand, empty house, and did not look back. Driving away from the estate, he felt the terrible, exhilarating freedom of a man with absolutely nothing left to lose. His war was no longer about revenge. It was about sanitation. The city thrummed with a nervous, glittering energy, the way it always does on the eve of a major social event. Billboards in Times Square flashed with advertisements, sirens wailed in the distance, and in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, an army of workers was putting the final touches on the Sterling Foundation Gala, hanging crystal chandeliers and arranging thousands of white roses. To the world, it was a night of celebration, a testament to a family's legacy of power and philanthropy. But in the quiet, hidden corners of the city, Liam Sterling was making the final, somber preparations for a demolition. The eve of the gala was not a night of anticipation for him, it was a wake. It was the last night on earth for the Sterling family as the world knew them, and the last night for the man Liam had once been. His first stop was not his home, nor his secret apartment, but the downtown law offices of his attorney, a sharp, formidable woman named Maria Sandoval. The office was dark, save for a single light over a vast mahogany conference table. Spread across it were the documents that would legally formalize the inferno he was about to ignite. The divorce petition, citing adultery and fraud. The civil lawsuit against Richard and Isabella Sterling for the recovery of embezzled funds. The formal complaint to be filed with the district attorney's office. Sandoval, her face stern, looked at him from across the table. "Liam, I have to ask you one last time," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "We have enough here to win. We can file this quietly tomorrow morning. You can ruin them without this." public spectacle. Are you absolutely certain you want to go through with it this way? This will be a nuclear event. The fallout will affect you for the rest of your life. Liam met her gaze, his own eyes calm and empty of doubt. A quiet filing would be a consequence, he said softly. What I have planned for tomorrow night is a reckoning. They didn't just steal money, Maria. They built their entire world on a foundation of my trust, my love. I'm not just taking back what's mine. I'm tearing down the condemned building. He picked up a pen and, with a steady hand, signed each document, his signature, a stark, black line that sealed their fates. His next meeting was far less formal. In a quiet alley behind the hotel, he met a freelance technician. Divided by V technician he had hired. A man who came highly recommended for his skills, and more importantly, his discretion. Liam handed him a sleek, silver USB drive. This is the presentation, Liam said, his voice low. It's labeled Sterling Partnership Initiative. It will be given to you by a gala coordinator tomorrow. Your only job is to ensure that when I go on stage, this is the file that is queued up. The file I give you now, not the one they give you tomorrow. No one else is to see it, no one else is to handle it. You load it and you press play when I give the signal. Is that understood? The technician, a young man with nervous eyes, simply nodded and pocketed the drive, along with the thick envelope of cash Liam gave him. The final technical piece of the trap was now in place. With the logistics handled, all that was left was the personal reckoning. He walked back to his war room for the last time. The corkboard, with its web of strings and pictures and documents, looked like the obsessive work of a madman. But to Liam, it was a monument to the truth. He stood before it and methodically began to take it down. He didn't tear it apart in a rage. He carefully removed each pin, stacking the photos, filing the documents into a single heavy briefcase. He was erasing the evidence of his hunt, clearing the field before the battle. When the wall was bare, the room was just a cheap, empty apartment again. He left the key on the counter and walked out, closing the door on the man he had been for the past several months, the man who had lived on coffee and cold fury. He didn't go home. Isabella, he knew from Vance's final report, was at a celebratory dinner with his mother. The two women, united in their deception. Instead, he walked. He walked through the city streets, a ghost moving through the vibrant life around him. He found himself standing across the street from the small art gallery where he had first seen Isabella. He remembered the way she had explained a painting, her passion so seemingly authentic, her smile so bright he had felt momentarily blinded. He felt a faint, phantom echo of the love he had felt for her, like the sensation of a limb that has been amputated. It was a memory of a feeling, no longer the feeling itself. He moved on, a tourist visiting the ruins of his own heart. Finally, late in the night, he returned to the penthouse. It was silent and dark. He walked through the rooms, his footsteps echoing in the space that had once been his sanctuary. He saw it all now with alien eyes, the furniture they had chosen together, the art they had bought, the view from the window they had admired. It was all a stage set, and the play was over. He walked into their bedroom and saw the suit, his suit for the gala, laid out perfectly on the bed. A somber, exquisitely tailored tuxedo of midnight blue. It looked like armor. It also looked like something a man would wear to his own funeral. He supposed, in a way, it was both. He went to his dresser and picked up a silver frame that held their wedding photograph. He looked at the two smiling, hopeful people in the picture. He studied the face of the man, the younger, softer, happier Liam. A man who believed in love, in honor, in family. He felt a deep, profound pity for him, for his blindness, for his faith. With a slow, deliberate motion, he unfastened the back of the frame, slid the photograph out, and placed it face down in the bottom of his drawer, beneath a stack of old blueprints. The frame, now empty, he placed back on the dresser. The past was officially erased. There was no rage left, no grief, no love, no pain. There was only a great, silent, hollow calm. He was no longer a husband or a son. He was a consequence, an equation of justice that was about to be solved. And as he stood there in the darkness, looking out at the glittering, oblivious city, he felt ready. He was a demolition expert on the eve of his greatest work, and he knew with a chilling certainty that tomorrow the entire world would feel the foundations shake. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a universe unto itself, a swirling galaxy of old money and new power, all orbiting the gravitational center that was the Sterling family. The air was thick with the scent of 1,000 white roses and expensive perfume, the sound a symphony of clinking champagne flutes, and the self-satisfied murmur of the city's elite. Flashbulbs strobed constantly, capturing the glittering diamonds on display, the practiced smiles, the carefully curated image of a philanthropic dynasty at the height of its power. And at the center of it all stood the royal family, playing their parts to perfection. Richard, the benevolent king, moved through the crowd with a booming laugh and a firm handshake for every man. Eleanor, the regal queen, offered cool, approving smiles, her posture radiating an unassailable authority. And beside Liam stood Isabella, the crown jewel, breathtaking in a gown of shimmering gold, her hand resting possessively in the crook of his arm, her performance as the adoring wife so flawless it was almost art. Liam, dressed in his dark, funereal tuxedo, was a black hole in this glittering cosmos, a point of infinite density and quiet calm, absorbing the light around him, waiting for the moment of collapse. As dessert was served, Richard Sterling ascended the stage to a wave of thunderous applause. He stood at the podium, basking in the adoration, a master of his universe. His speech was a masterpiece of self-congratulatory hypocrisy. He spoke of legacy, of the values his grandfather had instilled in him. He spoke of integrity, the bedrock upon which he claimed Sterling Enterprises was built. But a legacy is not just about buildings, he declared, his voice resonating with false sincerity. It's about family. It's about passing the torch to the next generation. He then beamed, his eyes finding Liam in the crowd. And tonight, I have never been prouder. My son, Liam, has not only become a brilliant architect in his own right, but he has come home. He is joining me as a full partner, investing his own future in the future of this family. It is the proudest moment of my life. The room erupted in applause again. Isabella squeezed Liam's arm, whispering, "Isn't he wonderful?" Liam simply smiled, a thin, cold curve of his lips, and applauded along with everyone else, the sound of his own hands clapping a slow, steady beat, like a drum before an execution. Then, it was his turn. The master of ceremonies announced his name, and a polite, expectant applause followed him as he walked to the stage. He moved with an unhurried, almost dreamlike grace. He felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, felt the warmth of the spotlights, but it all seemed to be happening at a great distance. He saw Isabella mouth the words, "I love you," her face a perfect portrait of support. He saw his father nod, a look of immense pride on his face. He reached the podium and adjusted the microphone, the silence in the room growing heavy with anticipation. He looked out at the sea of faces, a blur of wealth and influence, and began to speak. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous hall. "My father spoke tonight about legacy, he spoke about family, and he spoke about truth. And I find myself thinking about those same words. What is a legacy if it is not built on truth? What is a family if it is not bound by trust?" He paused, letting the words hang in the air. He saw a few confused looks in the audience. This was not the celebratory tone they were expecting. "For years," he continued, his voice never wavering, "I have admired the image of this family, the image of strength, of integrity. But an image is a fragile thing, a facade. Tonight, in the spirit of new beginnings and absolute honesty, I want to show you the reality behind that facade." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the tech booth in the back of the room. "I want to show you the real foundation of the new Sterling & Son partnership." And then it began. The massive screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying the elegant Sterling Foundation logo, flickered to black. A second later, they lit up with a video feed. It was his own living room. The room gasped as one. On screen, there was Isabella, his wife, in the arms of Richard, his father. The kiss was slow, intimate, and undeniable. A wave of shock and scandalized whispers swept through the ballroom. Flashbulbs began to fire in a frantic, predatory frenzy, no longer aimed at the stage, but at Richard and Isabella's table. Isabella's face had gone chalk white, her mouth open in a silent scream. Richard looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, his face a mask of purple, apoplectic rage. Before the crowd could even fully process the adultery, the screen changed. Elena Petrova's brutally simple slides appeared. The promise, the ghost, the payoff. The $23 million fraud laid bare in a presentation so clear that no one could misinterpret it. The whispers of infidelity were now drowned out by gasps of criminal conspiracy. And then came the final, brutal blow. The screens went black again, but a sound began to echo through the ballroom's state-of-the-art speaker system. It was the audio from Richard's Bentley. His father's voice, smug and conspiratorial. Isabella's voice, cold and cruel. Their plot to steal Liam's investment, to ruin him, to cast him aside, filled the hall. The sound of their private contempt for him, their laughter at his expense, was made grotesquely, horribly public. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum of pure, unadulterated shock. In that moment, Richard Sterling, clutching his chest, made a terrible, gasping sound and collapsed forward onto his table, sending plates and glasses crashing to the floor. Women screamed. Security guards surged forward. The beautiful, orderly universe of the Sterling Gala had descended into primal, shrieking chaos. Isabella was frozen, a golden statue of ruin, her eyes wide and vacant. Eleanor was on her feet, her face a terrifying mask of fury and humiliation, her life's work of maintaining appearances incinerated before her very eyes. Through it all, Liam stood at the podium, untouched by the storm he had unleashed. He leaned into the microphone one last time, his voice cutting through the pandemonium. "That," he said, his voice still unnervingly calm, "is the truth of the Sterling legacy." He placed his notes neatly on the podium, turned, and walked off the stage. He didn't run. He didn't look back at his father being lifted onto a stretcher, or his wife being swallowed by a wall of reporters, or his mother screaming at the staff. He walked with a steady, measured pace through the chaos, out of the ballroom, and into the cool, indifferent air of the New York City night. The first wail of approaching sirens beginning to rise in the distance, a fitting score for the fall of the House of Sterling. The explosion at the Sterling Gala was not a self-contained event. It was the epicenter of a cultural earthquake, with aftershocks that rocked the worlds of finance, society, and media for weeks. The headlines were a feeding frenzy of schadenfreude, Sterling Empire implodes in scandal, the serpent in the penthouse, father, wife, and the fall of a dynasty. The story of Liam's judgment night became a modern legend, whispered at every dinner party and boardroom meeting in the city. The consequences for the guilty were as swift as they were brutal. Richard Sterling survived his heart attack, but he survived as a broken man. He awoke in a private hospital room to find himself under federal investigation for massive corporate fraud, his assets frozen, his company in receivership, and his name, the name he had worshipped above all else, transformed into a synonym for disgrace. He would spend the rest of his days, not in a boardroom, but in courtrooms and hospital rooms, a fallen titan, haunted by the ghost of the empire he had single-handedly destroyed. Isabella, the Golden Girl, suffered a death of a different kind. Her social execution was absolute. The friends who had once envied her now crossed the street to avoid her. The designers who had clamored to dress her now refused to take her calls. She was served with divorce papers the morning after the gala, and she soon discovered that the Swiss and Cayman accounts, the foundation of her future, had been frozen by international authorities, thanks to the meticulously documented evidence Liam had provided. Stripped of her husband, her lover, and her stolen fortune, she vanished, becoming a cautionary tale, a ghost of Gala's past, left with nothing but the bitter ashes of her own ambition. And Eleanor, the queen of appearances, was condemned to the one fate she considered worse than death: public irrelevance. She retreated to the Westchester estate, a prisoner in her own museum of hollow triumphs, the Sterling name now a permanent stain she could never wash away. Her dynasty was in ruins, Her life's work of maintaining the facade had ended in spectacular failure, and she was left to preside over an empire of dust. Liam, however, did not celebrate. There is no joy in amputating a part of your own soul, even if it is diseased. He moved through the legal proceedings with the same detached calm he had shown on stage, a man simply finishing a job. It was during a final meeting in Maria Sandoval's office, weeks later, that the final, unexpected chapter of his story was written. Sandoval slid a thick, aged envelope across the table. "This came for you," she said, "from the estate of your grandfather, William Sterling. Its delivery was contingent on one of two conditions: your 35th birthday, or Richard being declared legally unable to manage his own affairs. I suppose this qualifies." Liam opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, written 15 years ago, in his grandfather's familiar, elegant script. "My dearest Liam," it began, "I write this letter with a heavy heart, and I pray to God that you never have to read it. But a man must be a realist, and I have known my own son for his entire life. I have always seen the rot in him, Liam. A hunger for more that could never be filled, a disregard for the lines that separate ambition from avarice. I built a company, but I fear I raised a pirate." The letter went on to explain that William Sterling, distrustful of his own son's character, had taken extraordinary measures to protect his grandson. Years before his death, he had secretly established an entirely separate, colossal trust fund in Liam's name, managed by a discreet firm in Geneva. The assets in this trust, drawn from his own personal wealth long before it was absorbed into the main Sterling Corporation, were completely insulated from Richard's control and his crimes. The value of this hidden inheritance dwarfed the tainted fortune his father and wife had been fighting over. It was not just a safety net, it was a kingdom, clean and untainted, a final, protective embrace from beyond the grave. Liam read the letter, and for the first time since that night in Chicago, he felt tears well in his eyes. Not for what he had lost, but for this, for a love so prescient, so powerful, it had reached across time to save him. His victory was now absolute, but it was not a victory he wanted to live in. His first act was to put the penthouse, the beautiful stage for his life's greatest tragedy, up for sale. He packed a single suitcase, took the briefcase full of his grandfather's documents, and left New York City without looking back. He had not won back his family. He had won his freedom from the very concept of it. He was scarred, perhaps irrevocably. The part of a man that trusts freely, that loves without suspicion, was an amputated limb. But he was whole in a way he had never been before, defined not by his father's name or his wife's betrayal, but by his own resilience. He was the architect of his own survival. And so, the story of the Sterling family ends, not with a triumphant celebration, but with a quiet, somber closing of a door. It stands as a powerful reminder that justice sometimes wears a tuxedo, and that the most devastating reckonings are planned not in a fit of rage, but in the long, patient silence of a deeply wounded heart. So remember this: never, ever underestimate the quiet of a man who has endured too much. For when he finally decides to speak, his voice can shatter empires. Thank you for listening. In our next story, we will explore the secrets a woman finds in her husband's will, secrets that suggest the man she mourned may have been a monster she never knew. What lies buried in the hearts of those you love most? Join us next time to find out.